And that look down memory lane on where this journey started by Zainab Ismail. As the panelists were watching, I have Professor Colin Sodote, I have Ahmed Nasir Abdullahi, constitutional lawyer, as well as Charles Kanjama. Ahmed Nasir says it's like a movie, and Charles says it's quite dramatic. So let's get their quick opinions on this. First things first. To Professor Odote, do you see this as having been a journey worth the while?
You know, reflecting on the process, if you go back to the start and reach at the end, it boils down to a statement I was saying off air, that, and I think it's the Honorable Duale who made the statement, that politicians, by their very nature, are extremely deceitful people. Because it is their deceit that has taken us to where we are 4 years later. So if you look at what originally was communicated to Kenyans as to be done, and what eventually we've ended up to be, you'll tell yourself that the 4 years were not worth it.
Originally, it was communicated to be something for the better of Kenya that is divided.
Exactly. And if you look, and I'll just pick two things that I think for me are important. Number one is if you pick the 7-point agenda and look at them, the 7-point agenda were essentially communicating problems that Kenyan had, number one. Number two, if you look at the first report that was released to Bomas, the report talked about constitutional reforms, yes, but it talked about policy, legal and administrative issues. I remember reading that first report. A lot of the things it was saying that let us focus on the software of Kenya and not the hardware. That software of Kenya is about what is it that is Utu for us, a conversation that this country needs and we should have done. But after that, what did we do? We turned everything. When you ask us the first question, you said, is the BBI bill dead? The BBI bill is the constitutional amendment bill. That wasn't, in my understanding, what the entire process was supposed to be about. But because the politicians are by their nature deceitful, they took us on a 4-year run of a completely different thing.
Ahmed Nasir, do you share the sentiments? Was this a waste of time?
I mean, it was complete waste of time and resources. I mean, I think we need first to get the perspective what BBI was all about. I mean, BBI had nothing to do with ordinary Kenyans. It was not for me. It was not for you. BBI was a political enterprise of two individuals. I mean, they took a high-stake gamble. Uhuru and Raila thought that nobody matters except the two of them. Uhuru thought that if Raila, you know, keeps quiet about what he does or gives him a wink, he will get his way. Raila, on the other hand, thought that through Uhuru, he can achieve what he wants. So it was basically a conspiracy of two persons. I mean, there was nothing in it for me. There was nothing in it for the people I know. It was for two individuals. And I've said this many times, and I repeat it. BBI was one of the most radical attempts to reconfigure Kenya. It has never happened. It has never happened. Such an in-depth surgery of the basic, you know, structure of the country. I mean, where have you seen in the world an initiative that creates 70 constituency? You don't give IEBC, and the president, through a personal fiat, occasionally consulting Raila, decides where those 70 constituencies will go. That is it 30% of all parliamentary seats? I mean, it was too radical for me. I mean, the Kenyan people were not consulted. We don't know how it came about. The president appointed, you know, some sidekicks of his to undertake this process. And that's why I said, you know, actually, I mean, there was no chance of such a process, you know, succeeding in court. And of course, the two appellate courts, you know, went through the judgment of the High Court. It is the High Court that they give a lot of credit because it went through uncharted water. But any reasonable lawyer will tell you that an initiative where a president on his own starts funds when Parliament has not provided budget for it to the tune of 20 billion, I think, will have zero chance of success when a reasonable, independent judge scrutinizes it. And I'm surprised that people talk, you know, has reggae stopped, has the court. I mean, there is no other option that was open to any of the courts that have interrogated this process.
Right.
Yes.
And Charles, I mean, someone will say, surely you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Was there anything good to be rescued or can be taken forward in any future attempt?
I personally believe that BBI had some good parts some bad parts and some ugly parts. I like to talk of it as the good, the bad, and the ugly, both in terms of process and in terms of substance. In terms of process, there were some good things. There was a genuine attempt to try and bring people who are on opposite sides of the political spectrum,
yes,
with very deep hostility and division for different electoral cycles together. That was positive. There was an attempt to actually investigate and interrogate what ails us every 5 years, this electoral cycle that creates such deep divisions, ethnic and economic chaos in our country. How can we deal with it? So there are some good parts in the process and also some parts which are not good. As Ahmed Nasir has explained, the process was not really inclusive from the beginning in terms of constituting the team, that the steering committee or the task force that went around collecting views on the Building Bridges initiative. Several stakeholders were not given sufficient opportunity to present their views. Some of their views were ignored.
Right.
Some professional bodies, faith-based organizations were finding out at the last minute, the last week, oh, we are getting the final views. The process was mired in secrecy. Even when the BBI bill was delivered, I spoke to some people who were involved in the process. They were kept in silos. So you are a lawyer, you are dealing with this chapter, but there was such fear of you knowing what is happening with the other chapter. So this was part of the bad and the ugly in the process. And in the substance, there were some nice proposals in the substance to strengthen, for example, to increase privacy, the right to privacy in the Constitution. There are a number of good provisions in the BBI bill.
For you,
and some are bad.
What outweighs the good, the bad, or the ugly?
I used to say that if you have a cup of tea, even if 99% of the tea is good, but there's a drop or a dollop of poison, you will not take that tea.
Right.
So it was not simply a question of weighing the good, the bad, and the ugly, but saying, is there any poison in this bill that would make you decide not to take it? And I think the High Court, as well as several actors, identified some elements of poison in the bill, including on judicial independence, on the restructuring of parliament and making it a bloated parliament, on interfering with the independence of the electoral process of IBC. So there was some poison in that bill. There was some good, there was some bad, but the ugly was a poison, which needed to be extirpated for you to even think of the possibility of BBI going forward.
You've mentioned rights, and there's one of our panelists was mentioned by CJ Kome, I believe in the AOB part of the session earlier today, a 6-hour session. And the CJ criticized your use of social media to discuss the case that was alive in court. Will you apologize for this?
No, I mean, first, I mean, the CJ knows, you know, that I have a lot of regard for the court. As an officer of the court, you know, I have a lot of regard for her. I have a lot of regard for some members. But I mean, you know, the issue of my views have been raised by that court, and I think it's not every judge that has a problem. There are few judges that have some problems with my views. I think some of them live in mortal fear of some of the things we know about how the judiciary works. But there's really nothing for me to apologize. I mean, we comment about everything. I did not argue the matter. I did not say anything scandalous. I mean, if you look at, of course, I think that probably the CJ has appointed a registrar now to look at tweets of lawyers. Because even when I tweeted yesterday, I mean, they mentioned it. I mean, the judiciary of, one thing is that I think the court is very insecure about itself. Right. And that they think that a tweet by Ahmed Nasir or by Havi will either take something about its reputation or not. You know, a court of the stature of a Supreme Court should not be worried by tweets of lawyers or even politicians. It is preoccupied with weighty issues of law and policy and jurisprudence. But that when a court can, you know, spend pages after pages about tweets by lawyers, I think it's very unfortunate. I mean, because our courts are preoccupied with the mundane. There are bigger issues. Today was a big day for the court. It's one of the biggest judgments. And that, you know, they have taken what I think was a wonderful judgment by most of the courts except one or two. Most of the judges except one or two should not have been spoiled by commenting about a tweet Ahmed Nasir has said about the court or Havi has said or Esther has said.
So you stand by your tweets or your word?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. And any chance you could tell us those who are uncomfortable with your views?
No, but what did I say in my tweets? I just said, yesterday I said, in constitutional interpretation, does a member of the court considers his loyalty to the political class? And that is a very valid, weighty issue of law, in my view.
All right.
And I don't want to say, but if you listened carefully to some of the decisions that were read in the court, I mean, my tweet became very, very important.
Your tweet yesterday and some of the dissenting views. We'll be getting back to the weightier issues as well. You say, let's keep the tweets aside, but keep tweeting, keep us engaged in a conversation. We'll be looking at some of the issues, breaking it down in terms of what this particular issue on the basic doctrine structure really means, as well as any hope of any course of action moving forward. Stay with us. So unless you just landed or were asleep most of the day or are offline and are not able to see tweets of many people, including Ahmed Nasir Abdullah, you probably missed it that the Supreme Court of Kenya made a final decision that the BBI Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill of 2020 is unconstitutional. Gentlemen, I'll start with you, Charles. Who are the winners and who are the losers from this verdict?
Okay, the first winners, of course, is the people of Kenya. And the court made it clear that there were elements in this process that did not have sufficient public participation, like the attempt to create 70 new constituencies. The court, however, was not completely decisive on the question of public participation. But winner number one, the people of Kenya. Winner number two are those who brought the petitions against BBI in the High Court, and they were the respondents in the Supreme Court. They succeeded in their case, and they are winner number two. Winner number three, I would say, is the political team that has been opposed to the handshake and the Building Bridges initiative process. That is the team that is now coalesced under the Kenya Kwanza coalition. I think those are the winners as I see them. The losers, loser number one is the government of Kenya, the state offices, that is, and the public officers who put in a lot of effort and investment in this BBI process. They advised the president. The president was one of those people who took this action, and their loser number one. Loser number two, I think I would say, is the handshake partners, Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. They invested a lot of political effort, resources and so on getting BBI to pass, and they did not succeed. So I would say those are the main losers. And of course, losers number three, I would say, would be those who were very strongly supporting the BBI process among politicians, the political class, because they have been left with egg on their face.
Ahmed Nasir, you mentioned a figure earlier in terms of what was put in to this process, and some have said pegged the figure at 20 billion. For you, who are the winners and the losers?
I think for me, the obvious winners, winner number one was the judiciary, the courts, right from the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court. I'm one of the people who always say that the judiciaries have some challenges, which I think is fairly obvious. But I think the biggest winner were the courts. I mean, especially the way the High Court, asserted itself. Nobody thought this could be stopped. I mean, everybody thought that because Uhuru and Raila are together, and the whole country, completely crushed, nobody thought it could be stopped. So when the High Court stopped it, then the Court of Appeal affirmed it. Then lastly, the Supreme Court, despite, the division they have shown, sort of, upheld the main components. I think we have shown how strong our judiciary has become in terms of this kind of issue. And I think the second winner, in my view, was the Constitution of Kenya. I mean, they tried to mutilate it, they tried to kill it, they tried to flush it down the toilet, it refused. That resistance by the Constitution clearly showed that the architecture of the Constitution we established in 2010 could still withhold these political earthquakes, the political collapse. Lastly, for me, the winner was you know, the political class opposed to the BBI, led by the deputy president. I think, of course, you know, I mean, we should not give them the credit that they were standing on a high, you know, moral pedestal.
Yeah.
But I think they played good politics. I mean, they knew that this is a two-man affair. I mean, this is very unpopular, I think. It was very unpopular, despite the fact that, you know, I think it's Prof. said, not proper. People are saying that BBI was uniting Kenyans. What Kenyans? And which Kenyans did BBI try to unite? BBI was a very divisive political enterprise by the president and the deputy president. So those who stood up, you know, when everybody else is scattered, I think those who are the big winners. Who are the losers? Loser number one is the president. Loser number two is the president. Loser number three is the president. Yes. He took a gamble that was completely unnecessary. I mean, when you are in the, you know, I mean, you know, the president is taking fights that he should not take when he has a year to his end. I mean, this is, he should be sitting on a rocking chair and see the sun setting, eh? I mean, these are not the time he should be fighting this kind of wars. This kind of war is someone whose political future is ahead of him. The president's political future has come to an end. I mean, he has reached the pinnacle of his political career, the very epitome. From now on, you know, the kind of the body blows he's receiving should not be for him. It's not for him. He should have, I think he has done very well in terms of what he has achieved in the last 10 years. There are some places he didn't do well. But this is not the time to start a project as big as a BPI that tries to reconfigure. So for me, the net loser is the president.
Professor, as being the Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Nairobi, you definitely concur with the judiciary being one of the leaders and the Constitution. Who else do you see as the winners and the losers?
I think I agree with Ahmed in terms of the winners and even with Kajama. But in terms of the order, I think for me the greatest winner is actually the Constitution of Kenya 2010. And that ensures that we don't get into the debate about individuals. I think the Constitution is the winner because the Constitution has been straight. And when we got the 2010 Constitution, I think it's the former Chief Justice, the first Chief Justice, Mutunga, who used to say that the 2010 Constitution is a transformative document. I think this judgment confirms the transformative nature of the 2010 Constitution because it was pushed, it was straight, it was interpreted, and I think at the end, it has withstood the test of time. I think that for me is the greatest winner. I think the second greatest winner for me is the judiciary, because the judiciary from the High Court to the Court of Appeal, in the run-up to the judgment, and even in Ahmed Nasir's tweet, there was a feeling that the Supreme Court would actually buckle and the Supreme Court would actually make a political decision. I think they have made a constitutional decision. In essence, in some places, even correcting some of the things that I think were slightly problematic in the High Court. For example, I think the debate about the basic structure, in my view, was structurally problematic. I think they have reset that. So for me, the second winner is the judiciary, and under very great pressure. I think the third winner in this process is the people of Kenya. Because if you look at the 2010 Constitution, the 2010 Constitution says that it was about Wanjiku's Constitution. I think this process demonstrates the place of Wanjiku. And I think one of the greatest examples is to see ordinary citizens coming to court to argue on their own, not getting a benefit to argue for them. I think you remember Aluchier having argued for you. I think for me that was fundamental. The last one to demonstrate that is, I think, a group that we don't talk about. I think civil society and civil society groups and their place. Because a lot of the time people say, no, civil society have no place. But if you remember this process, the people who started the opposition to BBI were not the politicians. The politicians, by their nature, as I said, they are dishonest. So they take convenient positions. But I think if you look at Linda Katiba, if you look at Ikalangelei, all the way from Turkana, I think people who actually stood for the Constitution. So the people of Kenya are the greatest. The losers, in my view, number one loser definitely is the government. I think the government loses in many instances. The government loses from the president. The government loses from the legal advice because it is strange how you can make some elementary mistakes. We can argue about several others, but I think for me, one of the elementary mistakes that stood out, you can't purport to create 70 new constituencies in the manner that the BBI bill was saying about it. The rest, you can argue about the rest, but that was Constitution 101. So to have that kind of Constitution 101 mistake being happening, I think the legal people are the next loser. The third loser, in my view, are the political class that put their eggs in
one basket.
the BBI trend, taking them to a certain destination. I think that for me is the greatest loser in the entire process.
And in the decisions that were made today, there's 7 of them, and for layman it's quite straightforward. Multiple choice referendum, IEBC quorum, and whether it had public participation. You had your questions about that and whether it was really pronounced on it. Civil proceedings against the sitting president, 70 constituencies being introduced, and the popular initiative being led by the president. But there's one thing that sticks out, and that is a doctrine of basic structure, or structure, however you would word it as a legal mind. What is this?
You know, this doctrine of basic structure, to be honest, is something that has come to the tongue of Kenyans as a result of the judgment of the High Court. The basic structure doctrine had been referred to earlier in a case called the Njoya case about 2005, in the run-up to the first referendum to amend the Constitution of Kenya, which was abortive. It did not succeed. And the basic structure doctrine has this core idea that the Constitution is like a house, and this house is built upon certain foundations and certain pillars. And that core structure of the house cannot be changed if you want to still have the house standing. You can change some of the rooms, you can expand the house, you can adjust certain aspects of the design, but there are these core foundations and pillars that cannot be touched. Otherwise, you have a completely different building. You have to first bring down the house and then construct a new house. So the idea of the basic structure doctrine was to say that within the Constitution, there are certain provisions that cannot be touched. They cannot be amended. They were being called at times eternity clauses or unamendable provisions. And I think the argument was whether Article 255 of the Constitution, which lists about 10 entrenched areas, provisions that are entrenched, and you have entrenched clauses that require a referendum to amend, you also have additional provisions in the Constitution which form part of the basic structure. The judges were asked, what are those provisions? And they said, we cannot give an exhaustive list. We can give an example. So, of course, this caused a bit of concern to close analysts of the Constitution, because if you can't tell what is the basic structure today, it means any future attempt to amend the Constitution, you'll never know whether you're amending basic structure. As a lawyer, can you advise your client that you are able to amend this provision or not this other provision? So that was a bit of the weakness with the basic structure doctrine. This doctrine was traced back to a 1977 Indian case called the Kesavananda case, which was a case where the Supreme Court of India was trying to protect the Indian Constitution from mutilation by Parliament, because the Indian Constitution had a solely Parliament-driven process of amendment. There was no popular referendum, etc. This was the case with Kenya's independence constitution until 2010. But in 2010, we developed a modern constitution which already provides for referendum in the case of certain amendments of entrenched provisions. So the core argument was whether Article 255 of the Constitution was sufficient to protect the basic structure and those various steps that you have to follow, or whether we needed to still import the basic structure doctrine. And the ultimate conclusion of the Supreme Court judges is we do not need the basic structure doctrine. Some judges said that we still have the basic structure, but we don't need that doctrine with those 4 sequential steps of constituent assembly, etc. When you are amending the Constitution, it is enough to follow the Article 255 constitutional provisions, which require you to have a popular referendum at the end of the process, whether you use a parliamentary process or a popular initiative. Once you are done with that process, go to a referendum and get the Kenyan people to decide whether they accept or reject that constitutional amendment.
So it doesn't necessarily block any attempt later at changing, even with the eternity clauses, at amending the Constitution.
So I can say unequivocally that the judgment of the Supreme Court is to the effect that any provision of the Constitution of Kenya is capable of amendment, so long as you follow the process in Article 255, 256, and 257 of the Constitution.
All right, and let me revisit a tweet here, Again, Ahmed Nasir, Senior Counsel, you'll forgive me, but you also like to tweet on current affairs. This is to someone that has been named as a loser in this verdict. Raila Odinga, he tweeted earlier today, and he said, "We will not stop deliberations on the way forward that will decide on a future course of action that protects the interests of all those who voted to see the amendments come to light. For now, we have an election to win." How would you advise as they deliberate?
First, let me just revisit what my learned friend says, because he really put very well, what the basic structure is. But I think the flip side of the court's judgment today was that that judgment made the constitutional amendment under the 2010 Constitution to be actually as simple as the amendments that President Kenyatta won or Moi could take into old Constitution. If it wasn't the courts that stopped this process, I mean, President Kenyatta and Raila could have amended the Constitution yesterday.
Yes.
So that is the flip side of this jurisprudence that emerged. And I agree with them. It's very difficult, to read the basic structured doctrine in the text of the Constitution. It's very difficult. I mean, you can't really justify it, although it is a very intoxicating, very attractive, jurisprudential concept that can, when you argue it, you fly with it. Eh? Mm-hmm. But I think the court was right when they said you can't read such, a concept into a written constitution. Coming back to Raila, I mean, politicians are politicians. Even when they have even when you knock them down in the first round, they will wake up and declare victory. And I think basically that's what the Honorable Prime Minister is saying. I mean, this was knocked down, technical knocked out in round one. And when he says, for example, he talks to all those people who voted.
Yes.
Who voted for this?
They put a figure of 4.3, and then it said that the IBC verified 1 million.
Nobody voted for this. I mean, this is a construct of, I said many times, a construct of two individuals, bulldozed everybody, bet everybody to submission. And they will today the constitution will have been amended if it wasn't for the courts that stopped it.
Right.
Yes.
Professor, this is something that will be exciting in your class moving forward with your students, the University of Nairobi and elsewhere. This is setting a precedent, if that's what you call it professionally. And for you moving forward, how does this shape any attempt at amendments to the Constitution?
At the start of this show, I made the statement that the BBI bill is dead, but constitutional amendment is not dead. Yeah. And I think the answer that has been given demonstrates why that is so. Mm-hmm. Because at the heart of the issues were just two. The rest were other issues. At the heart of the issues was basic structure vis-a-vis the role of the president. And I think on the role of the president, all the courts are clear. The president cannot get involved. On the basic structure, the High Court and the Court of Appeal said you cannot touch the basic structure of the Constitution. What that would have meant is as long as everything that was being proposed in that document was said to be basic structure, you could never introduce them in any other way unless you went through a constituent assembly. I think by the court saying that, the basic structure cannot be read into our Constitution, it therefore means that if tomorrow, politically not possible, but if maybe a year, 2 years down the road, somebody says, I want to amend the Constitution to deal with the question of 35% to counties. It is possible to do so as long as you end up with what Article 257 and 255 provide. As long as you end up in a referendum. That of the 10 things, if you want to do so, end up in the referendum. On other things, if it is not any of those 10 things, you'd have to go back to Parliament. So there are several things that I think it means. One is that the bill and the issues in it, if you bring it back, you have to deal with the political consequences. But the issues, if you pick and choose and determine these issues I think are critical to the country and debate them, it is possible to do so. I think that the next thing that is critical for us is from a jurisprudential perspective, and I think there was a lot of debate about jurisprudence, about precedent. I think there's a lot of interesting discourse that arises out of this constitution, out of this judgment, including the questions about, so what is the limits of the rights of, what's the limits of what Parliament can do, what's the limits of what the President can do, what's the limits of what citizens can do, and what's the power balance that's required out of them. So I think for me, those are the interesting things that arise out of this judgment.
We have heard the voices of people saying that those who are not happy with the verdict, that they are deliberating. For you, what do you think would form or would inform their strategy, given the verdict on the main 7 issues, moving forward in any attempt to change the constitution?
I think the key issue would be to determine what was the outcome they intended to have. Was it for political reasons? Was it really trying to improve the governance of the country? Because the political strategy collapsed the moment the Court of Appeal rejected the BBI bill, just as a consequence of time. Even if the Supreme Court had allowed BBI to proceed, it was not possible to amend the constitution and impact the election, because you are now able to donate positions, slots to different people. So the political aspect of BBI was dead already last year. And I think what the supporters of BBI were hoping from a successful outcome at the Supreme Court now was just that political capital to be able to go to the ground and say, you see, what we've been doing has been accepted by the court, and leverage that towards victory. You remember in 2005 when the referendum failed, the people who opposed to the referendum came together, they formed the Orange Democratic Movement, and they led that wave towards victory. In fact, many people believe that Raila Odinga won the 2007 elections. So if the supporters of BBI were seeking political capital, that one has now gone.
Yes.
If they are seeking to genuinely impact the governance of the country, to stop this cycle, as I was saying, of every 5 years crisis, ethnic division, and so on, there's still an opportunity. And going back to what Dr. Odote said about the initial 7 areas that BBI was meant to focus on, many of those areas could have been focused on even without amendment of the constitution. The question of changing the software, educating Kenyans. Even in this electoral cycle, the way we'll run this electoral season, we can run it in such a way that we embrace the positive ideas that came from the initial BBI report. So there's a lot that can be salvaged. Mind you, the BBI report, number 2, also proposed amendments to various laws. It wasn't only the constitution, but we ended up focusing on the constitution. Yeah. After the elections, some of those amendments to the laws were positive amendments. They can be revisited through parliament. They don't need a referendum. They're just parliamentary lawmaking.
Yes.
And then, of course, when we come back to amendment of the constitution, the decision of the Supreme Court has made it clear that it is possible to amend the constitution, but you need to be more modest about it. You cannot have this idea of 67 or 70 amendments in one bill and shove it kind of like down the throats of Kenyans through a process that is very driven by the government. But if you are modest about it, you can pick a few possible amendments, drive them possibly not as one bill, composite bill, but you identify the ones that are really critical, and they could go through. So there's a lot to be salvaged. Yeah. But what cannot be salvaged is that animal or creature called BBI. That one is dead. It is buried 6 feet under. We have put on the soil, the concrete slab, and I think also after a few days, there has been decomposition. So the body has rotted, and now you only have the bones.
But something that is being said might come back is perhaps taking action against the president when he's out of office. Would you see any value to that, given what people are saying they owe an apology?
I don't think that's a viable one. I don't think any serious government will follow that process. And I think there's a judgment, I don't know, one of the courts, I think it's the High Court and the Court of Appeal, that addressed that issue and said, you know, there can be no personal liability attached to the president in terms of the expenditure. So the judgment, I think, was there. Both courts, both the High Court and the Court of Appeal. Yes, affirmed that. But I don't think this is really a personal issue. Nobody will follow a president who has spent some money here and there on this process. The more, in terms of history, I think it is, you know, the judgment of the court, the political process, you know, that initiated it, I think that's that's the things, you know, Kenyans will remember about this process.
And finally, and as you give your final comment, my question to you would be, we focused on the verdict has declared BBI dead. Had it gone the other way, what would have happened? First, politically, would the election have been pushed forward in terms of implementing this, what was in the BBI amendment bill?
I think, you know, first you need to look at what the appeal issues were.
Yes.
The appeal issues recognize the reality, and the reality is what Kanjama said. The reality is that as a process, the BBI process ended in the Court of Appeal. These 7 issues, because even from the 7 issues, the appeal won 7, won 5, lost 2. The political reality is that even whichever way it went, all that would have gotten is political capital for one side and political loss for the other, which is what we've gotten, political capital and loss. The reality is that practically there was nothing going to be possible to do between now and the next election, either way.
Right. And Kanjama, you spoke earlier and you said, I mean, in terms of the timelines for the elections, because there was talk about this being an attempt to push forward the date for the elections, would you have seen that possible had it gone through or gone their way for those who were pushing for the BBI? And as you conclude?
I'll tell you honestly that I had some personal concerns, because mischief, political mischief, emerges every day, every week, every month. There are rogues in our political space in Kenya. Some of those rogues wanted to postpone elections. Some of them wanted to create a situation in which even the current president would possibly reinvent himself either in a new high political office in Kenya. There are rogues in this country who wanted to manipulate the BBI process for their own ulterior motives. And I was quite worried about it myself. I was scanning and monitoring the process. And what I would say is that this process of cementing the grave has at least completely quashed those intentions of the rogues. So we'll now have an election in August. That election, there would have been an opportunity of people to go to court, to the High Court, saying, oh, now we need to postpone the elections. We'll now have the elections in August, and we'll have a transition. And it's very good. It focuses the mind of the political players.
Right.
We have an elections. We are having a transition in the office of the head of state and the deputy head of state.
Finally, Ahmed Nasir, do you share the same concerns that had it gone that way, the attempts to postpone the elections, extend the term?
I agree with him. I mean, the permutation of what may happen will have are enormous. You know, you can't know. But I think one thing is that the dynamics towards the election will have changed greatly. I mean, the PPI proponent, the people who are supporting it, like, you know, Raila, the president, I mean, they will have really had momentum as we go to the elections. I mean, reggae is back alone, you know, creates a very powerful sound. So, but I think also the point Kanjama raises is very valid. Really, if this judgment will have gone the other way, I mean, we really don't know what will have happened. Anything could have happened. I mean, the elections could have been postponed, some amendments could have been brought. I don't know whether the time is, whether there is enough time to make this.
Right.
But if there are certain legislation, certain amendments that can be pushed through Parliament, I think they will have tried that. Yes.
All right. As for now, the BBI bill is dead, but the conversation on BBI is so much alive. Online, you can ask Ahmed Nasir and the others who comment on this. And the conversation, of course, will be shaped even politically moving forward and into the weekend for those who feel they're losers and those who feel they're winners and those who feel they can still go on with what they had intended with it initially. And for this conversation, it's our time. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Professor Collins. Thank you, Senior Counsel Ahmed Nasir and Charles Kanjama, a constitutional lawyer, for weighing in on this conversation. Definitely could go on, but hey, we respect the law of time, so we'll end it here. Good night. Thank you for watching.
This is NTV.
Harpic's 10 times better cleaning compared to regular detergents and bleach, and kills 99.9% illness-causing germs in your toilet, including the COVID-19 virus.
So what do you think? Wow, Selena! Nimeamini sasa.
Kweli?
Yes.
that she's part of the mission, the next house is yours. Oh.
I'm growing up, I'm growing into every moment.
Thanks, Mom.
So if I
Nurture the moment with Minute Maid Delight. Now available in tropical, orange, mango and apple flavors.
We teach, inspire, and transform young minds to achieve their fullest potential. Welcome to our Raka campus and also the new campus along Eastern Bypass. Enroll today at Royal Brain School Executive Kindergarten and Primary School, a unique and executive school where the future begins.
The First Lady.
You were never really prepared to have a child. I am tired of trying to keep you happy. All day long I worked so hard. I do tons of paperwork and I organized my whole day to fit in this appointment only for you to forget and not care how it affects me.
I'm so sorry, it was my fault.
Yes, everything was your fault, yes.
Federico, please calm down.
Not only do the two of you go gallivanting who knows where, but you also don't seem to mind how filthy she left her room.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We were in such a rush that I didn't get time to organize everything.
Well, go clean up the mess you made and then feel free to leave this house.
No, excuse me, but she's not leaving from here.
Make this feel like this with a few sips of this. Get going with Go Fruit Juice, now available in 500 ml on the Go packs.
I'm growing up, I'm growing into every moment.
Thanks, Mom.
So if I
Nurture the moment with Minute Maid Delight. Now available in tropical, orange, mango and apple flavors.